Rain hammered the street with stubborn insistence, turning cracks in the pavement into shining black veins beneath the flickering streetlights. 16-year-old Lucas Hale stood pressed against the cold brick wall beside a closed diner, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The smell of old grease and wet concrete hung in the air. He pulled his thin hoodie tighter, though it did little to keep the chill from settling deep into his bones. He had been alone for 3 days. The sign on the diner window read, "Open 6 a.m., but morning felt impossibly far away. Lucas shifted his weight, and a sharp pain flared along his ribs. He sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. The bruises were still fresh, blooming beneath his skin in angry shades of purple and yellow. His father's temper always left reminders. Lucas reached into his pocket and unfolded the money he had left. 2 20s worn thin at the edges, a 5, and a couple of singles. $27. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him from turning back. Anything was better than going home. A semi roared past, spraying water across the curb. Lucas jumped back, heart racing. A police cruiser rolled slowly by a moment later, its headlights lingering on him just a little too long. Lucas lowered his gaze and started walking. He couldn't risk being questioned. If the police called his father, everything he'd run for would come crashing back. As he walked, his thoughts drifted to Mia, his little sister. The way she tried to be quiet when their dad drank. The way she pretended not to cry when shouting turned into breaking things. Lucas had promised her he'd come back for her once he found somewhere safe. He just hadn't known how long that would take. Across the street, a convenience store glowed through the rain like a small miracle. Last Stop Market. One letter on the sign, flickering weakly. Lucas checked his money again. A hot coffee sounded like survival. He crossed the street quickly and pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead. Warm air wrapped around him, carrying the smell of burnt coffee and cleaning chemicals. An older man stood behind the counter, barely glancing up from magazine. Country music played softly from a radio somewhere near the back. Lucas poured himself a small cup of coffee, loading it with sugar and cream to stretch it out. The warmth seeped into his fingers, easing the ache just enough to remind him what comfort felt like. He paid and took a seat near the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Customers drifted in and out. A truck driver grabbing energy drinks. A woman in scrubs buying milk after a long shift. Lucas sipped slowly, measuring time in mouthfuls. Every minute inside was a minute he didn't have to face the cold. That's when he noticed the girl. She stood near the refrigerators, about his age, wearing a black jacket that looked a size too big. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she kept checking her phone, shoulders slightly hunched as if she wanted to disappear into herself. Lucas recognized that posture. He'd seen it in the mirror. He'd seen it in Mia. The girl picked up a soda, studied the price, then quietly put it back. The bell chimed again. A man entered, tall and thin, his movements sharp and restless. His eyes darted around the store too quickly, not lingering on anything except the girl. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. The man wasn't shopping. He was hunting. Lucas's gaze dropped to the man's hand just in time to catch a flash of metal as it slipped from his jacket pocket. A knife. The girl hadn't noticed. She was still turned away, unaware of how close danger had come. Lucas's pulse thundered in his ears. His first instinct was to look away, to stay invisible. That was how he'd survived for years. But then he thought of Mia. Lucas stood so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His coffee tipped and shattered, hot liquid splashing across his shoes, but he didn't stop moving. "Hey," he called, his voice breaking despite his effort to sound steady. The man spun around, the knife fully visible now, its edge catching the harsh fluorescent light. The girl turned at the same time, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Mind your business," the man growled, stepping toward Lucas. Lucas's hand shook, but he held his ground. "You should leave her alone." The man laughed, low and ugly. "You going to stop me?" The girl backed against the refrigerator doors, fear freezing her in place. Lucas felt the room narrow until there was nothing but the three of them and the space between. Before doubt could stop him, Lucas lunged sideways and shoved a nearby display rack. It crashed to the floor, bags of chips bursting open and skidding across the tile. The man stumbled, swearing. Lucas grabbed the girl's arm. "Run!" They took 2 steps before the man caught Lucas's jacket and yanked him backward. Lucas slipped on the scattered bags and fell hard. Pain exploded through his hand as the knife slashed across his palm. He screamed, clutching it to his chest as blood soaked the floor. "What the hell is going on?" the cashier shouted, rushing forward with a bat. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The man hesitated, glanced toward the door, then fled into the rain. Lucas lay on the floor, shaking, pain pulsing with every heartbeat. The girl knelt beside him, tears streaking down her face. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. Lucas swallowed hard, staring at his bleeding hand. He didn't have an answer that made sense. He only knew he couldn't live with himself if he hadn't. As the sound of sirens grew louder, Lucas realized something had shifted. He had stepped into danger without thinking, and whatever came next, good or bad, there was no going back to who he had been before. Bright white lights burned overhead, sharp enough to make Lucas squint as consciousness settled back into his body. The world came in pieces first. Beeping sounds, the faint smell of antiseptic, the soft rustle of fabric. His hand throbbed with a deep, rhythmic ache that seemed to echo his heartbeat. He tried to move and hissed in pain. "Easy," a calm voice said. "You're okay. Don't try to sit up yet." Lucas turned his head. A woman in blue scrubs stood beside the bed, her hair pulled back tightly, her expression practiced but not unkind. She adjusted the bandage wrapped thickly around his palm. Red was already seeping through the white. "What happened?" Lucas asked, though he remembered far too much. "You stopped a bad situation from getting worse," she replied. "You're lucky. The cut was shallow, but you'll need stitches." Lucky wasn't the word Lucas would have chosen. He stared at the ceiling, memories replaying in sharp flashes. The knife, the girl's eyes, the sound of chips exploding across the floor. His chest tightened as adrenaline drained away, leaving exhaustion behind. But a police officer stood near the doorway, flipping a pen between his fingers. He watched Lucas closely, like he was trying to fit him into a box that didn't quite exist. "Name?" the officer asked. Lucas hesitated. Giving his real name felt like opening a door he'd worked hard to shut. "Lucas," he said finally. It was true enough. "You got an address?" No, the officer's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Parents we can call?" Lucas swallowed. "I'm on my own." The silence that followed stretched thin. The officer studied him for a moment, then scribbled something in his notebook. "We'll talk more once the doctor's done." The nurse finished cleaning the wound and stepped back. "You're being very brave," she said softly, like she wasn't sure he'd ever been told that before. The door opened again, and the girl from the store stepped inside, accompanied by another nurse. She looked different now. Quieter, shaken, but still standing. Her eyes found Lucas immediately. "This is Lena," the nurse said. "She wanted to see you." Lena took a tentative step closer. "I didn't even know your name," she said, her voice unsteady. "But thank you. I don't think anyone's ever done something like that for me." Lucas shifted awkwardly. Praise made him uncomfortable. "I just did what anyone should." She shook her head. "No, most people don't." The officer cleared his throat, sensing a moment he didn't belong to. "I'll give you 2 a minute." When he stepped out, the room felt smaller somehow. Lena glanced at the bandage on Lucas's hand, her lips pressing together. "That man, he's been following me. I thought I was imagining it." Lucas met her eyes. "You weren't." She exhaled shakily, then hesitated. "My dad's going to want to meet you." Lucas's stomach tightened. "Why?" Lena looked down at her hands. "Because he doesn't forget things like this. Especially not when it involves me." Something in her tone told Lucas this wasn't going to be simple. Night had fully settled again by the time Lucas was discharged. His hand was wrapped tight, pain dulled by medication that made his head feel light and distant. He stepped outside the hospital doors, breathing in cool air that smelled cleaner than the rain-soaked streets he'd left behind. For a brief moment, everything was quiet. Then the sound came, low, heavy, rolling. Lucas turned toward the street, just as headlights appeared around the corner. 1 became 2, then 4. then too many to count. Motorcycles poured into the parking lot, engines growling in unison, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. Fear rooted him in place. The bikes parked in a wide arc facing the hospital entrance. Engines shut off one by one, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. Men dismounted, boots striking wet pavement. Leather jackets, patches, hard faces softened only slightly by curiosity. From the center of the group, one man stepped forward. He was tall and broad, his presence commanding without effort. Gray threaded through his beard, and his arms were covered in worn tattoos that hinted at a lifetime of stories Lucas couldn't begin to imagine. "You the kid?" the man asked. Lucas nodded, his mouth dry. The man studied him carefully, not with menace, but with focus. "Name's Cal Rowe," he said. "Some folks call me Iron Wolf." Lucas felt the name settle into his chest like a weight. "My daughter tells me you put yourself between her and a knife," Iron Wolf continued. "Didn't run. Didn't look away." Lucas shrugged weakly. "I didn't think about it." Iron Wolf nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something. "That's usually how you know it's real." One by one, the other riders stepped closer. None of them spoke loudly. There was no threat in their posture, only respect. One of them pressed a folded stack of bills into Lucas's good hand. "For food," the man said simply, "and a place to sleep." Lucas stared at the money, overwhelmed. "I can't. You can," Iron Wolf interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "And you will." Lena stepped out of the hospital doors then, walking to stand beside her father. She gave Lucas a small, encouraging smile. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Iron Wolf said, placing a heavy hand on Lucas's shoulder. "But you're not sleeping on the street. Not after what you did." Lucas looked around at the circle of strangers, dangerous by reputation, yet standing here because of him. Because of one choice made without thinking. For the first time since he'd run away, the future didn't look like an endless road that it looked like a doorway. And as Lucas took a tentative step forward, he realized this night wasn't the end of his story. It was the moment everything began to change. Lucas didn't remember agreeing to anything, yet somehow he found himself riding through the quiet streets on the back of a motorcycle. The city sliding past in streaks of amber and shadow. The engine's steady rumble vibrated up through the seat and into his chest, grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. He held on carefully with his uninjured hand, mindful of the tight bandage wrapped around the other. They stopped in front of a small diner with steamed-up windows and a flickering sign that read Rusty's. It wasn't fancy, but light spilled warmly onto the sidewalk, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted out as the door opened. Lucas's stomach tightened with hunger he'd been ignoring for hours. Inside, the waitresses greeted the riders by name, their voices easy and familiar. Lucas slid into a booth at the end, unsure where to put himself, until Lena sat across from him. Her presence steadied him more than he wanted to admit. Food arrived quickly. Eggs, toast, a stack of pancakes, so tall it made him blink. Lucas hesitated, then ate like he hadn't eaten in days, because he hadn't. With every bite, the fog in his head lifted a little more. Iron Wolf watched him quietly from across the table. "You got somewhere you're headed?" he asked at last. Lucas swallowed. Lying felt harder now. "Not really." Iron Wolf nodded, as if that answer made sense. "We've all been there." After breakfast, they rode again, this time to a low building that smelled of oil and metal even from the street. A sign above the door read, "Rowe Auto and Repair." Inside, engines lay open like puzzles waiting to be solved. A man with the same broad shoulders as Iron Wolf, but an easier smile, stepped forward. "So this is him?" Lucas straightened. "Lucas, I'm Pete," the man said, shaking his good hand. "You know how to sweep a floor?" Lucas managed a small smile. "Yeah, that's a start." Upstairs, a small room waited. Clean sheets. A window. A door that locked. Lucas set his backpack down and sat on the bed, staring at his hands. Everything he owned fit in that bag, and yet it felt like more than he'd had in years. Pete lingered in the doorway. "You can stay as long as you need," he said simply. When he left, Lucas lay back and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the sounds of work drifted up from the garage. Voices, laughter, the clink of tools. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. He pulled out the old phone Pete had pressed into his hand earlier. One number mattered more than any other. He typed it in from memory and stared at the screen before pressing call. "Mia," he said when she answered, his voice thick. "It's me. I'm okay. I found a place. Good people." He closed his eyes as the weight he'd been carrying finally shifted, just a little. Outside, the day moved forward, and for the first time in a long while, Lucas let himself believe he might move with it.